Hello, Jennifer Byrne here, and welcome to the vodcast for ABC TV's First Tuesday Book Club, the show for people who are passionate about books and reading. For other vodcasts like this, go to abc.net.au/TV/video, and don't forget to watch the show on ABC TV. Enjoy. Hello and welcome. Tonight we're looking at the tricky business of adaptation, turning books into movies. Now, we are a book club. We love them, don't we? Which makes it very easy to take the hard line that films wreck books. I'm sure we can all rattle off a list of travesties, beloved books which have been put through the film industry mincer and emerge mere shadows of their former glory. And that sense of betrayal when it happens, it runs so deep. It makes you furious. I mean, how dare they? How could they get it so wrong? But if we calm down for a minute, I'm sure we'll remember the one or two or dozens or hundreds of great films which have come from literary sources. It's always been a hot-button issue amongst readers, so we thought, high time we talked about it. Let's meet our panel tonight. Anna Kokkinos is a filmmaker who's adapted some extremely difficult books in her career, including Christos Tsiolkas' debut, Loaded, which became her debut feature, Head On, and Rupert Thompson's The Book of Revelation. John Marsden is an author who's recently had the first of his Tomorrow series, Tomorrow When the War Began, adapted to the silver screen and has lived to tell the tale. Margaret Pomeranz is a writer, a critic, and for our purposes tonight, a passionate reader and film lover. And John Colley has walked both sides of this fence. He's a novelist and a screenwriter. He adapted Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander with director Peter Weir and is currently working on the adaptations of Tim Winton's Dirt Music and Robert Drew's The Drowner. Please welcome them all. Now, rather than start with principles and discussions about the essence of books and stuff, let's start with some examples, concrete examples, and work backwards. Start with you. Good adaptation. John Colley.
Jaws.
Peter Benchley's Jaws.
It's a great film and a good book. I think the adaptation worked because without being untrue to the book, without having to add too much or take too much away, it actually produced the essence of the book and was in its own terms a great kind of a rollicking good ride.
In fact, in lots of ways, Jaws, the film, dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun,
I was going to say, the music
outstripped the book,
Sure.
didn't it? And
Yeah.
I wonder if that's actually quite common, that it's not always a bad book, but it was an ordinary book, but a pretty spectacularly successful movie, the first of the big summer blockbusters.
Yeah, quite.
Do you think that's right?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's what, well, when you're adapting a book, that's what you're aiming for. You're aiming to make it at least as good as the book and, if possible, better, or at least to appeal to a wider audience.
And in what way does Jaws, do you think, get at the essential difference between a book and a film?
Well, it's a visceral experience. I mean, I think the essential difference is that books are reflective and films are immersive. So you read a book and you can kind of you can put it down, you can walk away, you can think about it, you can reread pages. You're constantly taking information and processing it, and books play on that, and that's the great value of books, that you can revisit the information. A film lives or dies according to whether it completely grabs you by the scruff of the neck at the beginning and doesn't release you until you emerge from the cinema like a dreamer waking. It has to be like that.
In Jaws' case, wake in fright.
Exactly. If you look at your watch in a film, it's lost you. It's basically failed.
Well, one of the interesting things is that's right. The big kind of visceral nature of that film was crucial to its success. But the interesting thing is, Jaws, the novel, I don't think was a great piece of literature. And I think one of the great things about a lot of adaptations over the years is that you don't have to actually get a great book, a masterly kind of piece of literature to actually adapt. Often it's the books that aren't that well written but just have a great story that actually are the best to adapt.
Yeah.
Action.
Action is really important.
Plot.
Good plot, good characterisation, and actually something that kind of has a visceral kind of propulsive nature to it. When you've got a really great piece of literature, the people who read that novel, imagine that novel, they become very passionate about it, and great writing, great language is really, really hard to translate on the screen. They're such different mediums. And so often it's the really great novel that is the most daunting, the most challenging in terms of a filmmaker approaching it and actually kind of saying, well, I'm going to take this really loved book and now try to kind of mirror or give an audience a kind of a different kind of experience, but you know, boy, you're really taking on something when you try and take a great piece of literature, because it's all so much about language, and then kind of trying to translate that into the visual form, into a cinematic form.
Well, then why on earth have you chosen as your good adaptation example, probably I would say the greatest book of the last decade, Cormac McCarthy's The Road?
Because I think it is a great adaptation. I mean, I don't think that John Hillcoat has done a perfect job, but gee, I think he's done a great job. I mean, I think it's such a fine adaptation. He's captured the spirit of the book, he's captured the tone of the book, and I think one of the most remarkable things he's done is visually translate the words of McCarthy.
But that's a most compelling narrative, that book. Yeah. I mean, it is one that you pick up and you do not put it down until you've finished it. No, it's got all the ingredients that you want for a screenplay. You know, it's a contemporary horror
But
story.
I'd argue that, in fact, it is a completely cinematic novel, you know,
Yeah,
and that's
agree.
the key.
Yeah. So
He's actually
surprised
written
that
it. But that's the beauty of it. He's actually written... It's almost like that book could have been the blueprint for the film.
So why
I think it's just ghastly you're even saying that.
Sorry, Jennifer.
Awful. Look, I must
Well,
admit...
can I tell you just as an adapter what the problem of adapting that book, and I've not seen the film, I believe it's done really well indeed.
Yeah.
The problem with adapting that book is that part of adapting is that you've got to make specific things that are suggested. And, you know, a little bit like Tomorrow When the War Began, there's some dreadful things in The Road, I mean, even more so in The Road, obviously. And it would be possible to do an adaptation of that book that came out like a zombie movie, because there are gangs of roaming cannibals and people hung up for food and that kind of stuff. To actually extract something lyrical from that kind of material is, I think, a wonderful achievement.
John, Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, another post-apocalyptic. Yeah. And kind of a very dark movie, literally, because it's filmed in black and white, if we ignore the travesty that was perpetrated by an American film company in colour some years later. But the original movie with Peter Brook was done with tremendous fidelity to the book, and they did something which I would have thought impossible, and that was to find characters who exactly matched the mental visualizations I had, and they just stepped into those roles as though they'd walked straight out of the book. And the dynamic between those kids worked beautifully. There were rumours that Peter Brook had done terrible things by having them brought together in a kind of community during the filming of the movie, and got them to treat each other in real life off camera as they were treating each other according to the screenplay. But I read an article a few years ago about a reunion between all the actors when they were 45 years old or whatever, and they said it was wonderful and they'd had a great time and they were all very happy. So,
and did they go on to become...
well, the guy who played Piggy became a confectionery salesman, which seems extraordinary. Just like life imitating art again.
Again, that is a book with a strong narrative drive. It's not, and probably what we should be discussing is books which don't give you that, because if you've got a strong narrative, basically it's quite difficult to stuff it up in an adaptation.
I suppose it does.
Books like Out of Africa are really interesting, where actually I think a classic film was produced from a classic book, and it's got all the things that you kind of dread in an adaptation, where it's first person, a lot of it is reflective, it's a meandering plot, and somehow that distillation was really successful.
Well, I remember seeing Housekeeping, the Marilyn Robinson book, years ago. It's a tiny film. Bill Forsyth directed it. It was one of his brief stints in America many years ago. And I felt like that. I felt that I'd gone into this world with this strange woman who had to look after these children. And it actually validated difference in a community. There's a community that wants everybody to conform, and she can't. She's obviously mentally unstable in a lot of ways, but a beautiful person. And I loved what that experience did for me in the cinema, and I went and bothered to get the book afterwards and read it, and I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful adaptation.
And was the essence the same?
Yes,
it was?
absolutely.
Because sometimes, you use the word fidelity and the so-called fidelity issue, that we all kind of instinctively say we want fidelity between the book and the film. Because sometimes what you're saying is that it actually something can be found in the book,
and it's quite possible
brought
to do
out
that
in the film.
Yeah, you can reproduce very well all the incidents in the film and miss the essence, in which case you failed.
Exactly.
Because the success of the film was about delivering the essential. People talk about it cynically as the author's message, but it's really the kind of the controlling idea of the film. And unless you've got that, you've got nothing.
And look, I completely agree. And that's one.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the great things is that often with books that you may choose to adapt, you also, as the filmmaker, are coming to that piece of work and saying, what is it that's got me hooked into this? What have I responded to in the material that actually is going to give me a kind of a through line, my take, my interpretation on this sort of original source material. So there's that kind of adaptation as well.
But let me ask you, you're the author, you've had your book adapted. Now they come along and take your idea and say, well, I'm a filmmaker, this is my concept. But isn't it your book?
Yeah, but that's fine for them to bring their own take to it and make it a new piece of work, a new piece of art, if you want to be pretentious. I'm happy for that to happen. If it's somehow bastardised in the process so that whatever concepts you had in writing it are altered or left out completely, then that would be pretty disturbing. But on the other hand, sorry, I was just going to say, when you do an adaptation of a book that's done really well, you are on a hiding to nothing. So if you make Harry Potter or something into a movie, if you do it faithfully to the book, then people will say you lack imagination as a filmmaker. And if you don't do it with perfect fidelity to the book, then you get hung, drawn and quartered by all the Harry Potter
I have to say with the Harry Potters, I found they were so faithful.
Yeah, they got boring.
It was a bit boring.
Because of that. Yeah,
it was a bit boring.
And that's where the flair of the filmmaker's got to come in, because they've actually come in and said, look, this is really what this film, this is what it's about. This is the bit that I'm really going to struggle with. And I think successful adaptations do that really well. Margaret, your choice for a good adaptation.
I know. No one likes it. But I love...
Let's all gang up.
In the Cut, the Jane Campion film of Susanna Moore's book. And it was an unmakeable film because of book adaptation, because of the way the book ends. And she did a major cheat by changing the ending of the film.
The difference between life and death, in fact.
Yes, exactly. And I was relieved, to tell you the truth.
Oh, that's so wet, Margaret. Come on.
I am a was. But you see, I think it's a really interesting journey. When I saw the film, I literally came out onto the street and I nearly fainted. I think that she has the ability to trawl women's sexuality in such a deep and profound way.
Jane Campion or Susanna Moore?
Both. But really, for me, the visceral experience was the film.
Oh, so all I could see
was Meg Ryan.
And those lips, those little trouty lips. And her playing, she was playing this incredibly on the edge, exploring the wilder shores of sex. And it was
it's embracing death as well, because I don't know whether people have read the book, but it is about a woman who witnesses a scene in a bar, and then the woman who's involved in the scene is later murdered, and she can identify the man who was in the scene not by his face but by a tattoo on his wrist. And the cop that is investigating the crime has the tattoo on his wrist, and she has a major affair with him. And there you have the whole sex and death thing, which I find pretty damn interesting, to tell you the truth.
We're going to move on now to some bad ones. We're going to move on to some bad adaptations where, and again, why it didn't work. Why don't you start this time?
Well, I have had a hatred for about 3 decades now of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I was the only person in the world that hated that film.
You are so ornery.
I'm perverse. I'm the only person that liked In the Carton. I'm the only person that hated One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I'd read Ken Kesey's novel in the early 60s and loved it. And it is actually told from the perspective of the Indian Bromden in it.
The guy who sweeps, yeah.
The sweep. And so it's like a gobbledygook world that you see through his eyes. And what the film did was just take the external narrative, and it is sort of like pretty much the hero's journey, you know, standing up against authority, and it's got a good message to it. But I felt it betrayed the journey of the Indian, who, you know, once again, it's to do with the language. It's beautifully written, and his background, his war service, all the rest of it is in there, in this jumbled world that he sees.
Would you, while accepting it's not faithful, would you accept that it told a parallel story or an equally good story?
No, it just told the story, you know, which is the external story.
Do you think it's filmable in the original?
I don't know. Because I've reread it, and I was thinking, how could you do it these days? And I actually think it would be a good one to try.
You actually liked the adaptation,
Yeah, I
didn't you?
did. I loved it. And but I respected the fact that there was a big difference between the novel and the film, and the film was not nearly as profound. But again, you're talking about narrative all the time. I keep talking about character all the time. For me, they got all the main characters right. They interacted in a way that was moving and powerful and engrossing, and yeah, the casting was brilliant.
But you see,
and I was happy.
it's interesting. That's a great example of how, if you had have taken that novel, and I haven't read the novel, I've seen the film, that novel, and kind of made it from that point of view, what that would have forced you to do probably is actually have some kind of voiceover. Given that the chief, the whole issue is that he's actually deaf and dumb.
Actually,
and there's a trick
he sees
in that.
a visual world.
Isn't there a trick in that, though?
No,
that gets revealed at a
I was
certain
thinking
point?
that, you know, it's not so much a narrative voiceover as a world that he sees that is controlled by
which I would argue would
cogs
be
and-
almost impossible to convey.
I know,
And
I
see,
know.
and that's what I mean
But
about
I would
the tyranny.
like someone to try.
But I think it's also a really good example of why you do, generally speaking, do we all agree, it helps if you read the book first? Because you can sort of, you know, you may be a bit antsy about the film, but the fact is if you see the film first, you can never really read the book without his or her
I
image.
disagree. I think you could
No?
see 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you know the book is completely dispensable. I mean, the book is.
That's right,
I
the
mean,
book
like
doesn't
a lot
matter.
of art. The book doesn't matter, but it was, you know, you could then read the book to get where all that stuff came from. I'd like to respond just to one of John's points about character and action, because my feeling in a way is that in film, action is character. That you know you can't editorialize about the characters. You can't hear their thoughts as you can in a book. You only get one look at them, and that you can't sort of triangulate usually from lots of different perspectives. And so the character is defined by their action. They're defined by what they do. And there's all these sort of beats of kind of action. Narnia, the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. That was a good adaptation, and they really added only one beat of action, and that was the first thing where you find out why the brothers hate each other. In the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, is that Edmund hates Peter. It's kind of unexplained. He's just an awkward child. They added in this brilliant opening sequence where you learn that the father died in the war. Peter has become the father, sort of the de facto father of the family, and Edmund resents that. And in this scramble to get to the air raid shelter where Edmund is protesting and Peter is taking the lead and Edmund resents him, you suddenly understand, in an action, the character dynamic between these two that actually then resonates right through the film and informs the very ending and delivers the ending, which is the kind of Edmund finally rises to the kind of the challenge and learns sacrifice. So that's it. I mean, I think... you know, as a novelist, you have all these different ways of expressing character. As a film writer, you only have action.
Your bad adaptation, your offering...
Fantastic, Mr. Fox. It's just
It's cruel.
Just a awful thing, a vile film. And
So why? And in what way does that?
And there's a kind of vileness to a lot of Roald Dahl's books, but it's always there's a whimsy as well, and there's other sweetening factors. But in this film, there is nothing of that. It's as though they took a classic American middle-class family with the irresponsible childlike father, the long-suffering wife, the son who's in conflict with his parents just because he happens to be an adolescent, and it's all that conflict comes out of nothing other than that, and they make them into foxes, which for no reason. There's nothing fox-like or animal-like about them at all.
And do you like? And it finishes in the supermarket.
The ending is just, I don't know, I hope it's tongue-in-cheek, but I don't think it is. I think it's just, I don't know what the message is of the ending. They're standing in this utterly sterile, soulless supermarket that stretches in every direction, and I'm not sure, what are we supposed to take from that?
I thought it was fun. I thought actually the film was, I think your points are really good, but it was, I hadn't read the book. So you feel it betrays the nature of the book?
Yeah, it turns it from a whimsical, lovely thing into something that is just reprehensible. And I think probably even worse than the supermarket scene is that moment towards the end of the movie when they're travelling along a road towards the supermarket or somewhere, and they're suddenly transfixed, and they all stop and they look up the hill, and there's a wild wolf, standing there, and there's a kind of reverence for about 18 seconds while the wolf and the fox make eye contact. And this is meant to represent, I think, that the fox has got sort of some empathy with the wild, he's got some kind of connection with the primitive past, and then he goes on to the supermarket, and we never, 18 seconds is all we ever get. Utterly suburban.
Interestingly, Perfume, a kind of, I think when Perfume was being made, everyone said unfilmable, can't be done, you know. And of course, you know, a story that's so palpably about the world of smell and the fact that there's this central character who can only experience the world through smell and sense was always going to be problematic. And of course it is, and the film is actually sort of a remarkable failure in a way because it tried to do too much. I think primarily that's an example where you've got a really kind of dense novel full of ideas, very exuberant prose, great language.
Much loved.
You know, much loved by many, many people. And in a way, Tom Twyker kind of tried to sort of mirror the bigness of the book in a way, and I think he tried to do too much. Film, you have to distill, you can't have too many ideas in a film, you know. In a novel, you can read a half a page and there are 1,000 ideas that can actually be thrown at you by the writer. Whereas in film, you actually have to go the opposite of that. You have to distill and find the one central idea that is going to carry the narrative and carry your story, and then what you hope is that all the complexities of what you're actually dealing with kind of flow from that central, simple idea.
Yeah, and I think a great example of that is, I mean, I think you've said, John, that most novels for adaptation, you take about 70 pages, isn't that right? Roughly 70 pages?
Well, just the sheer length. I mean, a novel's what, 100,000 words. You know, a film script is 30,000 words. So you're having to cut into, or to distill into a third of its previous length. Yeah.
When you're taking a book that is as loved as Perfume, you know, I mean, for me, it's that book that if you're giving a book to someone who's not a big reader, that's the book I'll always, because it's almost fail-safe. It's just so readable, so entertaining. You didn't like it?
No, I didn't. Isn't that strange?
I think we're going to see each other out the back. But it is strange, because you are a big reader.
No, I know. I just never clicked into Perfume the way the rest of everybody in the world did. But I mean, obviously, I don't belong in this world.
With the exception of Margaret Pomeranz. I think it's very hard, particularly, that the onus then on the film is so much higher.
No, and that's why I feel conflicted even kind of saying... I mean, I think, as I said, it's got remarkable moments and, you know, that just take your breath away. There really is the moment when he inadvertently kills his first victim and then kind of pours over her body is so charged. Great moment.
But a legendary flop. Everyone hated it.
But everyone hated it. But I guess what I'm saying is it's worth revisiting because I'm conflicted about it. I think it's remarkable, but it's sort of a failure.
Is The Golden Compass your nominee?
I think people who are adapting blockbusters should look at The Golden Compass and say, well, here's what we're not trying to do. We're not just trying to, as somebody said about Harry Potter, we're not just trying to hit all the bases and reproduce all the favourite characters and the favourite scenes, because that in itself is not enough. The film has to have meaning, and you need to distill that, and that's your job as an adapter. And
you know, you've got to have a good filmmaker and a brave one at the helm. I mean, I can't wait to see Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. I have no idea what he's done.
I'm sure I will hate that.
Maybe, but at the same time, you've got a filmmaker that is absolutely
who has no
out
idea
there.
about story.
No, it doesn't.
Have you
But
ever
it's
seen
gonna-
a Tim
but
Burton
it will
film
be-
that has
It's going to be.
But it'll
and
be
Alice in
provocative.
Wonderland doesn't have a story. So what, I mean, the combination of
perfectly
these
matched.
two is that they're perfectly matched. It's going to be a
You're
disaster.
still too hung up on story.
I
You're talking about
confidently predict that
character-driven
Alice in
narrative.
Wonderland is going to be a complete dog of a movie, because the film has no narrative, and Tim Burton doesn't have a narrative bound in his body.
But it's a great book.
Like John, we've both
a great
completely
book.
trashed our careers now because we're starting insulting our colleagues.
But Alice
cameras.
in Wonderland is full of characters and no narrative, which is kind of, you were saying before,
So it'll
characters
prove
and
my
narrative.
point.
Well, here's a solution.
It's going to be a huge success now. I'm going to have
Here's a solution. I mean, I would look at a book. I mean, we were chatting before about Oscar and Lucinda.
Yeah.
But I was looking the other day at the film of Bliss, because
Yeah.
there's going to be an opera of Bliss. Now, I thought it was a great book.
Yeah.
Awful movie, or certainly in terms of the way it's travelled. Now it looks like it's going to be an opera. Now, sometimes I reckon if you adapt, we mustn't go too far down that rabbit burrow, but if you adapt into a different medium, like a play,
Oh, I think there are
or
definitely...
like Cloud Street made a great
Sure,
play,
and there are
I
some-
think Bliss will be a really interesting opera, but it wasn't a good movie.
There's some things that finally find their medium. You know, I was talking to some people recently about doing a film about climate change conspiracies. Actually, and it struck me then that climate change needs to be done as a play, because it's essentially a declamatory problem. It's about the power of words, about the power of language and the power to influence people, and that is best expressed on a stage. And it's something that film doesn't actually do nearly
Very
so
well.
well.
Yeah. No, I agree.
It's
It
not a
doesn't.
declamatory medium.
You know, I thought the big difference, which is also about one's individual relationship with a book or collective with a film, is, you know, when you get to a great moment in a book, you look away, you think, you look up. But a great moment in a film, you just... Your point about the...
I've actually
just
thought about
watch it,
the
watch it, watch it.
unfilmable book is actually the life of Muhammad. You're not allowed to show Muhammad, represent Muhammad, according to Muslim faith, an image of him. So the challenge of doing a biopic about Muhammad is probably the ultimate filmmaker's
Yes.
dilemma,
Yeah.
and that's going to be my next
That's
project.
your next project.
Yeah, good luck.
we probably will go on for a long time, but that is our program for tonight. A huge thank you to my guests. I'm sure you've enjoyed hearing from John Colley, Margaret Pomerantz, John Marsden and Anna Coconut. Thank you. We've started a discussion thread on our website, so please pop in and join the debate until we meet on the first Tuesday of April, when, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the new Ian McEwan, who's tackling climate change in solar, and also The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a book which has seen quite a few adaptations over the years itself. I'd ask you what you thought of it, but you know what? We'd never finish. Very happy reading and happy viewing. Thanks for your company. Good night.
For more ABC TV vodcasts, go to the website abc.net.au/TV/video.